Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Rising Tide Talk. I'm Matt, Roleplay Chat Capelli, and today we will be talking about tabletop RPG project design, specifically system design. But I kind of have a feeling that a lot of the advice and recommendations that our two wonderful guests will be giving us today will be transferable to a lot of third-party content, whether that be for an existing system or for your own system. I'm humbled to be joined today by two local legends of my city of Ottawa in the tabletop RPG design space. They both work for Hit Point Press as writers and game designers, among many other things. I'm sure they have a lot of hats that they wear at Hit Point Press. But between the two of them, they hold several Annie Awards and have worked on projects such as Humblewood, the famous 5th edition campaign setting, Big Bads, a 5th edition compatible collection of villains and baddies for your games, The Deck of Many, a 5th edition compatible collections of cards to help you organize things like monsters and NPCs, locations, and more. And of course, they are the two lead designers for Shift RPG, a new, simple, fast, and creative tabletop role-playing game system. Please join me in welcoming Jordan Richet and Graeme Fotheringham to the Rising Tide discussion. Hey guys, how you doing?
Oh,
the crowd goes wild.
Yeah, I hear it. I see, I see it. It's so nice.
Yeah,
There you
it's
go.
happening.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's so kind of you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. So
Sweet. So let's dive right in. So today I'm super excited to talk to the two of you about kind of all the intricacies behind designing and writing your own tabletop RPG systems. I'm hoping to kind of cover three main pillars in our chat tonight. But of course, tangents are welcome if you feel like they're relevant. You are the two masters of the content here. I'm just here to facilitate. But so the three main pillars I was hoping to cover are kind of the inspiration and conceptualization pillar. Then we'll move on into kind of the nitty-gritty of choosing mechanics, getting kind of the more crunchy parts of the systems put in place. And then the last part is going to be focusing on kind of the play testing, wrapping it up, and then the publishing side. Jordan, Graeme, are y'all ready for you're ready for the questions to start coming?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sweet.
Bring them on.
Let's do it. So let's go right into the thick of it and talk about inspiration. So I'd love to know what inspires you when you are kind of in this starting phase of conceptualizing a game or content. How do you know if an idea is worth pushing forward or kind of dropping on for something else? And just what ideas do you think, what are places you go to that are ripe for ideas, treasure troves for you personally when it comes to creating something, whether that be an independent tabletop RPG system like Shift, or a supplement or additional content that gets added on to existing systems? I'll throw this over to Jordan first. Jordan.
well, I mean, I feel like the fairly obvious answer for me is other games. What have I liked? Your toolkit isn't just the things that you've come up with, but it's, your toolkit should also be all the other games that you've tried out and played and read. And like, I don't get to play all the games that I have for sure, but I definitely read a lot of, like, I have stacks of RPG books beside my bed, and on the floor beside my bed, and sometimes on the bed beside me, where when I've fallen asleep. I have a ton of books that, I try and support a lot of stuff on Kickstarter and things, obviously, because it's supporting the industry is important. And so I have just as many PDFs. I recently shared my PDF folder with Graeme so he could start looking through that. So other people are working on things at the same time as us,
Mm-hmm.
and we should be learning what's out there, seeing what we like, what we don't like, and then you kind of build up your personal tastes that way as well. And then it serves two purposes. It gives you ideas on design and systems and things like that, which is really important. What other people are doing, but then it also lets you find maybe holes, places that mechanically or even just settings and stories and stuff that aren't maybe you've got a type of play in mind that just isn't being supported in the way that you want it to be
Mhm.
supported by another game. And so if you're keen, then that's a good solution is to invent your own to fill that gap, right? But read, research, and ideally play. But that's not always an option.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Very, very cool. How about yourself, Graham? Is it a similar answer, or
Uh,
are there other things that you go find inspiration in?
I think I'm very, very different from Jordan in that like Jordan knows just about, and he'll say otherwise, but Jordan like knows just about everything that's out there. At least in like, I'll mention something and he'll have at least heard of it, which is always really amazing. But I know very little of what's out there, and so I think when we're making games together, there's kind of like a nice meeting in the middle, where
Mhm.
I'll just like I'm always just trying to find new ways to make things. So I'll look at a set of dice, and I'll ask myself, not necessarily like what can I make that's not out there, but just like, is there a way to use these dice that other people aren't using them? Probably not, but I'm still going to try to find that anyway. Or I'm very privileged to work with a bunch of game designers full time, and so it's really nice to just I'll spend a weekend hyperfixating on like an idea and I'll post it, and I'll get some nice feedback before someone says, "Oh, that's like already been made." But I get more of a kick out of just like making stuff anyway, than I
Nice.
do maybe sending it out into the world. I just So for me, it's just making. I just love making stuff. It's not even necessarily about it being for anyone else, with the exception of Shift. Shift has been the big thing where it's like, okay, this is our chance to do something different, I think. And that's been a really fun exercise.
Yeah, and I think the world needs to know about Shift. So absolutely. I think I'm glad thank you for not keeping that one to yourselves, because that one's really cool.
Oh,
Absolutely.
that's really nice of you.
I'll move on to the next question, because I think inspiration is indeed something that's very it's very subjective. It's we're all going to find inspiration in our own places. But one thing that I think in any kind of project, whether that be creating our own tabletop RPG system, making our own content, or even just like in general project management principles of like creating a game, creating a product, there's a lot of foundational things that I think are important to kind of set off at the beginning. But in a tabletop role playing game, there is such a broad range of options to consider: audiences, the levels of complexity. A tabletop role playing game can be so many things. In your experience, what kind of foundational elements have you found to be helpful to kind of establish from the get go before you get too far down the rabbit hole when you're creating a project like Shift or others?
This is one of those two wolves moments where like my game designer brain is so at odds with my project manager brain, in that I want to make something and I don't want it to take a long time and I want to find out if it's worth making very quickly. And then my project manager brain is very much like, you need to know why you're making it. You need to have contingencies. You have to do all of those things. But I think I've recently discovered that it's not so much that they're at odds. Just like maybe it's better to put one in front of the other. So like if you can afford it, if you have the time, explore an idea and see if you like it before you feel the need to start making like Gantt charts and really putting all of those in place. That's really important. There's so many steps that you can take to set up a successful game, but you're probably going to want to know, is this something I'm going to have the stamina to enjoy making throughout the entire process? Especially if you're just doing it for yourself and it's maybe not like a business endeavor. That's probably where I'd start. Just make sure that you know that you want to. And then if you need project management stuff, it's something you're going to learn along the way, but also like that's the easier stuff to look up online. Like there are processes for that.
Mhm, mhm.
Figuring stuff out, a unique game mechanic, that's much much harder.
Yes, yes, absolutely. How about yourself, Jordan?
well, Graham kind of at the end there kind of got into where I was going to say from the more Graham is a excellent project manager, and very organized man, or at least he can put on the airs of organization a lot better than I can. And I'm really just like a chaotic creative mind that just spits out things and has artsy tantrums and stuff like this. But I agree with Graeme, and I think the number one thing is that you should make whatever you're making, make it because you want it in the world. I mean, I think this goes without saying for most creative endeavors. It's going to be a lot easier if you actually want to, like, you know, we work for a company that makes RPG content, and there is content that I'm interested in at work, and there is content that I am not interested at work, but I do have to work on all of it because it is work, and that is fine, and obviously that's part of a job. But when it comes to you being at the core of something and coming up with the seed of the idea and everything like that, make sure you're making it for yourself. I mentioned it in our podcast conversation, Matt, but you know, like the original Deck of Many project was those reference cards, and I made them because I needed them, and it made the project a lot easier to make because I wanted to see them at the end. I think that's part of the reason Shift is being received as well as it is, because people can feel that Graeme and I really love it, you know, and want to see see it out there. So
I hope that comes across.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of my follow-up question was, were those the things that you established first for Shift? And I guess the answer is yes. Were there other things or other kind of levels of intricacies that you might want to get into here? Like when you were starting Shift off from the very beginning, what were some of those, you know, key domino pieces that you tried to line up at the beginning? I would imagine things like that core mechanic, perhaps. Is there a story there?
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
Shift's origin, Shift's origin story is Graeme says to Jordan, me, hey, I have this idea for these dice that shift around. And I was immediately interested and enamored. And I said, well, we just mathematically, we got to flip them and make the D4 the best die and the D12 the worst die, which was a little of a wild concept. I think if you're coming up with anything mechanical, coming up with that core hook, whether it's shifts and traits like in Shift, or whether it's roll a 20 and beat a number, or whatever it is, because once we decided that was solid, every other mechanical decision that we've made, it's still happening even just recently with things like critical hits and stuff like this, because that core mechanic is so solid. It's like flipping back. Like if you're reading an essay or something, the beginning of the essay should have the first paragraph of the essay should explain what the essay is trying to get across to you, right? If you're lost in the essay, you should always be able to go back to that first paragraph and say, oh, okay, this is what they're trying to tell me here. I see the message they're trying to get across. And the same goes with us, at least when it comes to Shift. I tend to overcomplicate things. Graeme, I think, will admit that he sometimes oversimplifies things. And we meet in the middle and always be like, can we do it with a shift die and a trait? And almost always we can. And because that main mechanic is solid, and Graeme, you can tell him about the first time you ran a game using the core mechanic where you basically invented the thing on the fly.
Yeah.
And that's when we knew, I think.
Yeah, it was basically, what was it? We were actually playtesting a different game one night at work. And then at the end we had, before people had gone, I'd packed like my bag full of these, what were the Shift like character sheets. They were just like little cards. And that was always my hope, is that I could fit them on like little cards, because that's like, I love small games. I just like RPGs that you can just pull out a couple dice and kill 20 minutes. That was what I loved. And then again with Jordan, just like weaving epics and stuff and putting all that stuff together, we found this like what I think is like a really beautiful middle ground. And sure enough, I was able to kind of like get the folks at work together for like the last 10 minutes of that session, and everyone just quickly jumped into improv mode. I pretended like I knew what I was doing for a game and made up a zombie scenario on the fly in a mall. And people just started rolling dice, and they had a really great time. And that was before it was even like a Hit Point Press product. Like it was just something that Jordan and I had been working on because we loved doing it. I mean, I don't know if I can speak for you, Jordan, but like so much of the things that we make, we would probably still be making them even if we weren't at Hit Point Press, because for me personally, it's the making of it that I get the biggest kick out of, even if it doesn't go anywhere. I just enjoy processes and starting to notice as a project manager that those are like, maybe there's transferable skills from DM to project manager to game designer. It's just like, it's weird.
Cool. Yeah, I'll echo the fact that yes, being a game master has a lot of transferable skills, whether that be the improvisation, hurting a group of people to do something, you name it.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of transferable
planning in
skills
advance. Sure. There's like, making sure that your people feel like they're contributing well, and like making sure that there's meaningful story beats coming up in the near future. That's all you are. You're a project manager. Just like you get to wear like funny voices sometimes.
Yes, exactly. And I think this community here, a lot of us are very much these creators that we create things because we love them. So I think that resonates a lot with this community as well. So I'll echo that 100%. And that's a fun story. The zombie mall apocalypse fight. I would have participated in that for sure. That's cool. Before we move on to the next kind of pillar in our conversation tonight, there was one thing that I was really curious to ask you guys, and it was with regards to kind of establishing a core setting. I know in Shift, it's system agnostic, right? It's setting agnostic, where you can play in a high fantasy world, you can play in a spaceship with an alien attacking you, you can play in a zombie infested mall. But where do you but also I feel like it's helpful to have kind of a core setting to help you develop a system. So I like to ask your opinion about what role having a core setting, how does that play into the development of a tabletop RPG system? And can you tell us a little bit about how having a core setting, it's not really a core setting, but having a setting that you can refer back to helped or hindered the Shift RPG development process?
Did you want to go, Jordan? I feel like you do this more than I do on the day-to-day. It certainly lately.
Yeah, I can kind of field it. I can field it, and you can kind of jump in if I miss some beats or whatever. But so the core setting or we can call it the developmental setting.
Sure, yeah, I like that. That's a good term.
Is called Maelstrom, and it's sort of a eldritch seafaring horror setting inspired by one of Graeme and I's favorite movies, The Lighthouse, and other such nightmares. It is a little tough to really figure out when Maelstrom started and when Shift started, because Maelstrom was an idea for a setting and Shift was a mechanic. And I think at some point, Graeme and I decided that we would fold in the cheese, as it were, on those two things. I think maybe we needed something to test Shift in. And,
it was very early,
and we thought,
yeah,
and I don't know if we were thinking wholeheartedly of the type of game that Shift would evoke when you were playing it, but it turned out that it worked well with Maelstrom. The current default setting of Shift is this: a little bit of resource management, a little bit of a dire situation. Your characters are sort of burning out, or they can burn out quickly, and that worked for a kind of spooky survival horror kind of thing. But as far as the importance of it, I think the biggest thing that it brings to it is that it gives context to the rules for the people who are playtesting it for us. I think if we were just putting out, if the beginning of our playtest document was invent a world and then run Shift in it, I don't think that would be as accessible as here is the rules for Shift, and then here's a sample setting that you can run in. Maelstrom has helped us hook people into also playing it, because there's a whole crowd of people who love that kind of eldritch horror kind of seafaring thing. So it's been good in all different directions, because having a solid idea for a setting will attract people to it, but having a setting for the mechanics to live in will also make it easier for people to play.
And did you consider kind of combining them? Because in the beta book, they're very separate from one another. In the beta rulebook, some tabletop RPG systems, the setting is like why you're buying it, almost, right? Like I'm thinking like Seventh Sea or Vampire the Masquerade. Like these are systems that you're playing 7th Sea to play in the world of 7th Sea. Like otherwise just play a different pirate game. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How did you make that decision to be like, you know what? Shift is going to be not devoid of a setting, but it's going to be its own thing and not dependent on one, I suppose.
I think we were just, I think maybe one of the things is we were just too excited about all the different like possibilities that what we feel the shift dice enable. For
Cool.
us, the shift dice, like that mechanic in the game, it's almost like an auto balancer in a way, like that you'd see in a video game, in that like someone has something powerful, the more they use it, the more they lose it. But it's not like, because we flip the numbers, it also kind of cuts off that death spiral that you get in a lot of those games, where the more you lose it, the more likely you are to lose it. And we managed to, have our cake and eat it too there. And all of that to say is that like it kind of just made it that we didn't have to worry about shift being the only option. Like Jordan and I, as you might be able to tell by like his, well, I think you've changed it now, but like made of cartoons, we both, I think one of the first things that we ever talked about was our love of cartoons. And, we want to use the game system we make to play like Saturday morning cartoons.
Cool.
And if we can make a game that does eldritch horror and cartoons, I mean, that's fun. I don't have to learn a new system.
Why not a cartoon about eldritch horrors, right? You combine the two. There you go.
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. We'll see. That'd be so fun.
I mean, it's basically Gravity Falls, right? Have you guys watched Gravity Falls? I think that's what it is.
Oh,
yeah,
I
Gravity
love
Falls
it. I love it so much.
The first of that, yeah. I think originally Shift and Maelstrom had a different name originally, but Shift and Maelstrom were going to be the game. And then we presented it we ran it for our boss before he had sort of purchased it and purchased the concept from us. And I think Rico, he's our big business brain guy. And I think he started the idea of sort of the system and the setting being separate. And because as far as what Hip and Press has been up to, it's a lot of D&D stuff. And we want to start sort of finding a way to detach ourselves a bit from D&D so tightly. And one of the ways, as we've seen with a lot of companies like Modifius and the Tales from the Loop folks and all that kind of stuff, having their own in-house system liberates them a lot, right? And then the other aim was that as we were developing Shift, we were realizing, well, this is a system that I think anyone could build a game for very easily. And it opens it up to the idea that pretty much anyone working in Hit Point Press could probably come up with a Shift setting and develop it fairly easily, and the mechanics will fall into place for it, right? And then that expands, of course, to the entire world being able to, hopefully, build Shift worlds,
Absolutely,
Shift settings. But yeah,
very cool. Yeah, I agree. That sounds great. I'm gonna move on if that's okay, guys. I want to make sure we get to some of the crunchy stuff too. Let's go on now to like establishing game mechanics and establishing some of that more tangible components of your systems. I have a question here, and it also is sort of related to a question that was posted in the RT discussion chat by Chris Hopper. So Chris, I'm gonna kind of bundle yours into here, but if I don't cover something that you want me to cover, feel free to let me know. Effectively, once you've set up those foundational elements of your game, you kind of have a core mechanic or something, an idea that you're like, let's make a system out of this. Why did you, in the case of Shift, decide to make a new system instead of adopting an existing system and creating like a subsystem or like a peripheral third-party content solution for an existing system? And the question from Chris relates to, Hit Point Press has been around for pretty much as long as 5th edition has been around. D&D 5th edition has been around. So when you're eyeing new ideas, how do you decide whether to go with an existing system or kind of bring up your own?
I wonder if it was even like a thing we thought was possible, Jordan, right? Like when we started making Shift, I don't think it had ever even occurred to us that it would be something that we could like that would be a part of a different system. I think just like it was always going to be its own thing, and it felt very different, right? It's like personally when you're playing like 5e or like another larger title. My plan, at least for Shift, and really why I make games in general, is because I have so many friends that are not also like tabletop fans, and I want to find games that I can get them playing right away, and I don't need to teach them a lot of rules, and we can just play. If that means that I take on more of a responsibility doing like GMing stuff, love it. And so with Shift, that was always a personal goal of mine. And in order to do that with other systems, I have to teach my friends 5e, and then I have to teach them how to use this other like homebrewed component. I just don't think that was personally ever a goal of mine for Shift.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
You don't want to ram square pegs into round holes. When a new mechanical idea pops into my head, the first thing I think is would this fit into something I'm already working on? Does it answer a question that I have for a system or something that I'm working on? Full disclosure, like most of my game design and hacking has been other people's systems. Shift is really the first wholehearted foray into designing something from scratch. But I have designed systems for our D&D campaigns to make things more interesting and more fun. We developed there's this whole thing that got cut out of a recent project that was a whole subsystem for running a settlement in D&D. It's going to show up in another one of our projects, I'm sure, but my experience has mostly been that. But when I'm playing games for myself, there's a lot of homebrewing, a lot of ideas and concepts coming on, and my thought process is, okay, the best example is I'm running a heist in D&D. And then I look at my shelf of other games and I think, what games can I crib from to make my life easier for this? Obviously Blades in the Dark comes to mind. Certainly I've incorporated clocks and stuff in. And then if I can't find something that fits, I start thinking of a mechanic that will. But it's always, for me, it's rarely... For Graeme, the mechanic comes first a lot of the time. He's just like rolling dice at his desk and says, "Oh, this is neat. This could be a thing." And then for me, I have an idea for a way to play a game, and I don't know that I've got the right game for it, or I don't think that the game has the right mechanic for it, or what have you. And so I'm definitely like, fill the niche.
Yes,
I'm not sure if this is answering the question as asked, but
that's okay. I think it's still valuable insight. And Jordan, you have worked not necessarily on systems things, but things like the Deck of Many, or things like that. You worked on Big Bads too, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
While not individual systems, these are still tools that are intended, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're tools that are intended to be used on systems that exist already. I wonder, perhaps I can shift this question into a different one. When you do something like that, when you create a tool for an existing system, what kind of considerations should you be keeping in mind for the creation of that product? Like, especially with things like the OGL fiasco and the debacle that happened, or existing common game mechanic core systems like the OGL or Paizo's Orc system, or the basic role-playing system by Chaosium, things like this. What are some considerations that you had to make when you were designing or creating those products that were kind of intended to be used in tandem with an existing system? And did you have to make any kind of OGL considerations or not?
Yeah. Obviously, the original content that we were making was stripped directly from the OGL because it was reference cards for specific monsters, and we weren't reinventing the wheel when it came to that stuff. When you're coming up with new things, that's easier, to be honest. I mean, as far as a license goes, the best way to duck and weave it is to come up with something that just doesn't need to reference it whatsoever, or references and builds on something that's there. The only thing you need to be concerned about is just not copying and pasting something from an already existing book. Like an example of expanding it is one of the things that I did on my Big Bads, the one that I actually wrote myself. came up with the idea of team legendary actions that were a shared set of legendary actions that like a bonded pair of people could use together. And when I'm thinking of new things like that, the other thing is, will this grow my toolkit, or am I focusing a lot of time on one small thing that is only going to be useful in this one esoteric situation? This may more come from like the fact that I do it for a living now, because to use, not to jump around too much, but to use Big Bads as an example, Big Bads is a formula for us now. We know what a Big Bad booklet looks like. We can give an almost exact word count that we need to a writer. We know exactly the breakdown of what that's like. And now it's part of part of Hit Point Press's toolkit is the idea that, it's transferable information, because we've started our new Floral Dragons booklets that are coming out. And even though they are different content and the vibe is completely different, we look back at Big Bads and know, oh, okay, this is the perfect booklet size. And so when I'm inventing a new piece of rules, I'm thinking, are we just trying to come up with this so that this one, is there a simpler way to do it in this situation? Or am I actually inventing something new that's going to be really useful to use down the line? And for me, those the shared legendary actions got repeated and used in multiple Big Bads because it was something that came up. We had two characters. A Big Bad was two characters, and we wanted them, their boss monsters, so we wanted them to all have legendary actions. And so there was a solution. Instead of two lists of legendary actions, there was just one that they shared, and now that's something that we can apply to everything moving forward. So
yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about kind of subsystems a little bit, very briefly. So once you've sort of got the core mechanics down of your game, I feel like most tabletop role-playing games have a lot of subsystems kind of baked into them. Things like resolution systems, rewards, progression, punishment, currencies, magic, yada yada. The list like goes on potentially forever. Are there some subsystems that you feel like are critical, or when you were designing Shift, what were some of the subsystems that you were like, yes, these are the ones that we're going to spend our energy on, and why?
The easy answer for me is I didn't want like anything. I was like, the dice does it all. I was
cool. Okay.
But
yeah, that's a good answer.
It's also one of the things that Jordan helped me realize is like, I'm not always going to be in the room with the people playing the games. It's all fine and good for me to sit down at a table when I'm showing people how to play my game and say, listen, don't overthink it. We're just going to make it up as we go along. The dice are going to act as a safety net. They're going to make sure that things don't get too wild, because that's what they're designed to do. But other than that, you just play how you want to play. But I mean, that's not going to sustain a full campaign. It's not going to appeal to the broad range of players and how they're going to use and play our game. And so, yeah, it was necessary to go into like what is commonly found in other games and be like, okay, can our game do that? Sure. Like what already exists? What do we need to develop? It was kind of just like, oh, okay, yeah. It's better to make something new than to try to force this one mechanic into everything, even though
Absolutely.
I tried.
Cool.
I think managing and trying to think of the expectations of your audience is like a big thing. The expectation is often there'll be equipment, there will be armor. These things will affect things mechanically. For example, you'll have a way to keep track of how your character lives or dies or whatever. And you look at all of these things through the eyes of someone who's looking at the system for the first time. And usually, I mean, I think our default is to think of someone coming over from D&D, because we're going to be trying to convert people from D&D for Shift, for example. And so what are the expectations? And then do we want to meet those expectations with the subsystem? With a subsystem, then okay, what's that going to be? And then alternatively, okay, we're not going to have equipment in the same that has, like, functionally there will be no difference between a long sword and a short sword in our game. How do we spin that so that it's understandable by somebody who has the expectation that there would be? I do like mechanics, but Graeme is right. We try and roll back to that one die roll as much as possible with Shift, and only put it in if it's solving a problem and not just making our lives easier.
Yeah.
Yes. I like that. And Graeme, you said something that I kind of want to bounce off of into the next question. You talked about how you're not always going to be there to explain things to the people playing the game. I'd like to know a little bit about what the two of you have found success in when it comes to writing your rules down, right? Because once you have your mechanics figured out, you got to write them down. People need to be able to understand them. Do you have any advice or recommendations for people listening on how you've found success doing that, or maybe in the Shift RPG system, what that process looked like in order for it to become a more polished product, a clear and easily understood rulebook?
Hand it to someone who has never seen it before. Our biggest watershed moment with Shift was giving it to our boss's partner, and Andy, and she looked over the whole thing, and she came back with some of the most useful notes and observations that we'd ever seen. She had played the game with us before, so she had a basic concept of it, but we had developed a bunch more things and all this kind of stuff, and she went over it. I think Graeme and I both are still we'll still fall into the trap of writing to explain the game to ourselves, which is not what you need to do. That's not useful. We invented the game. It's in our brains. We can play it in our sleep now, and that's not going to be helpful to anybody else. So yeah, get it into someone else's hands. Andy is not even a prolific RPGer either. Just like a good person, like a good editor, get it into someone's hands so they can read it. Yeah,
very good
advice. And we've shown it to lots, and now it's in the public eye, and then like on the beta and stuff, like get it out to other people as quickly as you can. You're going to have to take some lumps on it, obviously, because people are just going to be rude if they don't like it or whatever. That's a whole other discussion. But, for the most part, you're going to get like things that are obvious to you are going to be so not obvious to someone else. And that's okay. Then you'll rewrite it and you'll, with that in mind.
The only other thing real quick is like, don't put too much like faith in your first draft. Odds are it's the very first time that you personally are writing those rules down. For a lot of the time, it'll be in your head. You're going to write those rules down. You're going to come back to it like the next day or maybe a couple days later. And you're going to absolutely see things that didn't make sense or like that currently don't make sense as you read them back. So just don't be afraid to review it. It's similar to writing anything, really, I think.
Yeah, the sunk cost fallacy runs strong into game design, I think, especially in those early days when it's just words that you're writing down. You need to be ready to completely kill your darlings on certain things, And I think it's doubly even more noticeable when working with someone else, because Graeme and I, we don't butt heads, but we bounce ideas around a lot, right? And you have to kind of make concessions and realize, okay, Graeme wants this in the game, or Jordan wants this out of the game, or whatever, and finding the middle grounds on it. So, but in the end, I think working with somebody else is a benefit for sure. But don't get attached to anything. If 100 people play your game and 99 of them come back not liking something, well, it's probably a good sign that you should at least rework it.
Yeah, all very good advice, but I'll take that and jump us into the third pillar of our conversation tonight about playtesting and kind of like the polishing off and publishing. So you talked a little bit about getting other people to look at it. If 99 people don't like something, take it out. Can you walk us through a little bit about what folks should expect when it comes to playtesting or getting other folks invested in trying a product, what that might look like, and also how we can equip ourselves to make the most out of a playtest?
Don't feel like you have to wait until it's done. If you wait until you think your game is like perfect for, it's like if you think, oh, well, they're not going to get it because I haven't, fully figured out this mechanic yet. I mean, your game is never going to be done, ever. Like, I'd love to meet the person who said, perfect, and then closed the book. I don't think that person exists. It's just like eventually circumstances will dictate, that you need to move on to something else or you make a new version. But yeah, like don't wait until it's done before you start showing people, because you might very quickly realize that something doesn't work and you've probably been tooling with it forever. And that's why I have so much love for Jordan, is because it's so easy to just send him something and he'll be like, yeah, that's great. Oh, amazing. That's like a great way of looking at that, or the opposite. And I don't have to, I mean, it's weird how inherent it is as like a game designer to look at a game mechanic and see it as a puzzle and want to solve why it doesn't work. But maybe that's not the best use of your time, and definitely don't be afraid to hit that hint button, which Jordan is for me, and he can take a look at it and offer a new perspective.
Yeah, and then obviously a playtest, getting it out to other people. Like we did it in 2 stages, sort of. The current stage is that the beta is out there, and there's a feedback form for it. And that is a really critical stage to get to, because it means that people are taking the game home with them and running it without, like Graeme said, without us in the room with them. But leading up to that, in our alpha or whatever, pre-alpha or whatever you want to call it, was just me and Graeme running the game for groups of people. There was also a marketing angle to it. We were getting people in who we potentially wanted to work on with it. Or I guess we can announce now that Maelstrom's going to be on the Alchemy VTT, which is on Kickstarter right now. Cool. And we ran it for the Alchemy gang a year ago now, something like that. So there's a factor, like just getting eyes on it, especially when it's a business project like ours is. But in the early stages, you're not going to get better feedback, I think, as a game designer, is running the game for other people. Because one thing that a lot of people, I imagine a lot of people maybe find difficult to write, is the teaching of the rules to people. And you hone that really quick when you run 100 games of something. You learn how to teach that game in a clear, concise way, especially when you've only got 2.5 hours to run the session. I've invented some pretty interesting subsystem mechanics for Shift on the fly while I'm running it to solve the problems that come up while you're running it.
Cool.
So
yeah.
Graham's don't wait till it's finished is like the best advice, because I don't think it's even started until other people play it. To be honest. So
I like that.
Something that I've seen on like itch, like, and people suggest on things like itch.io and self-publishing and stuff like that, is put your first draft up for free. It's just so that other people are looking at it, and we have that. We have the philosophy at Hit Point Press too. Like, you can play Shift for free right now because, yeah, we put art and we've got a bit of a budget to do that. That's fine. Don't worry. You don't need to worry about that. But get the words out there, and 9 out of 10 times, if people like it, they'll give feedback, and then, or even if they don't like it, they'll still get feedback. You'll actually be able to make the game that people want to play. So.
Yeah, that's some fantastic advice, and I second Graeme. I really like the way you said that about how it's not started until you've played it for other people. I really like that. That's like a quotable. Put it on a mug.
I'm gonna try to put it. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, dang, it's even in the definition for a game that it's a game that's played. So if no one's played it yet, maybe technically it's not a game.
Yeah. That's awesome. So playtesting, we've got that done. You've got yourself a good draft. Before you go and, like you said, Jordan, you hit publish, quote unquote, publish on itch or on drive-through or whatever that is. What other steps would you consider doing before it kind of goes out to the public? And some things that are going through my head are things like getting something looked at by an editor, cultural consultants, accessibility consultants, things like that.
You answered your own question, Matt. You listed,
yeah.
And I mean, it really depends on what you're putting out there. If you're just putting out a system, maybe you don't need a cultural consultant necessarily, because it's just mechanics and rules. But like when it comes to Maelstrom, when that releases in whatever form that releases in, we're dealing with the sea and lots of like cultures and referencing island culture and stuff like this. You need to have people look at it that aren't you. Whether that's editors that are better at editing than you, or people who just simply are not the same kind of person as you.
Oh, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. So we won't labor that point, I think.
Yeah. Make friends with an editor. Graeme and I have the benefit of working for a company that has some in-house editors and the budget also. But if you invest in one thing, I think a nice cover art is great. Some interior pieces are nice, but if you can get an editor to look at your thing, it's going to make all the difference, especially if you're also trying to bring it to, say, Hit Point Press, because you think that it might be a good fit for our catalog or something, which is always an option, of course, but we'll be looking at it from an editing standpoint as much as anything else. So no audience is going to tear a group apart more than for spelling errors and and stuff like that, including our own in-house editors tearing us all new ones for that. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, great. Well, thank you guys. I think that's fantastic advice. Let's move on to our audience questions real quick. I think there's 2 or 3 that I haven't been able to address yet. So one was asked by Rich, the Hatchling DM, about it has to do with beginning projects again. So he talks about looking at cover art to keep focus and also to kind of help with marketing. We talked a little bit about how you like to start projects, and that's what Rich asks. But maybe I'll ask, how does art influence the beginning of your projects, if at all?
Graeme, tell him about the Maelstrom artboard.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you start. I start there a lot of the time, but I think maybe the most realistic answer is you kind of just have to start like within your means. If you're a writer and maybe you don't have access to like an art catalog, or maybe you're not doing that yourself, that can be really tough. I mean, just having art involved in your process entirely will help you think of things that you haven't thought of before. Like Jordan mentioned, when we were firing up Maelstrom, one, we watched The Lighthouse and loved everything about it, so that was a huge influence. But we also just went online and found everything that we loved about the setting, what it could be, all that kind of stuff, and we all kind of like put it up into one big ball. And then once like, I think there's a tipping point, right? It's like once you've looked at enough art, or you've read enough books, or you watch enough media, you have an idea of what you want your own world to be, and then you kind of don't even need those references anymore. It becomes its own adventure, really, and then your previous experience or your play tests will kind of inform where you want to go from there. That's how it works for me, anyway.
Yeah, I'm full of cliches tonight, but I think a picture is worth 1,000 words for sure. And even in the early days, like, we would share pictures of, before we had official Maelstrom art, we would share the things that Graeme had gathered on our board he had made it into a document, and people immediately understand what you're trying to sell them, you know? Obviously don't steal art and don't use that to, but as far as development goes, get that Pinterest board open and start putting things together.
Cool. Yeah, agreed. I couldn't agree more. Pictures are indeed worth 1,000 words. Yeah, I'll go on to the next question from BKR9899. He asks, do you have a set standard sort of system or mechanics you work with for projects, or does it change depending on what sort of concept you have for that specific project? And you talked a little bit about this, Jordan, when you were talking about Big Bads and how that sort of becoming a quote unquote template for other things. Is maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, from a Hit Point Press perspective, we love a template, as one of our writers, Verity, has said on word for word on numerous occasions. Shout out to Verity. So Big Bads as a concept is something that we hand off to a third party person, a writer and artists. Obviously, we manage them, but we get another writer that isn't our in-house writer. And in fact, they were like our writing test from the beginning. If we were trying to test out a writer, we would get them to write a Big Bad for us. And if you give someone a template, a very strictly templated thing, then you're going to have a lot of control of what comes back. But I think it applies to design as well, because if you're working within a template and you've come across one that works, with the context of Shift, for example, I've templated out what a little mini Shift world, 10-page mini Shift world is going to be. And we're going to be able to hand that off to writers and say, write something that follows this. Put your own ideas in it, but it'll follow this. And then when it comes back, half the editing and the preparation is already done.
Yeah, you've got the layout and stuff figured out too.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, that's awesome. Fantastic. All right, let's go on then to. We have one other question here from Harper's Ferry. She asks, when creating a new mechanic, how much focus do you put on utilizing the mechanic as a tool to bring to life the fantasy you are trying to simulate?
I think that there's a couple different methodologies. Yeah. Like I think there are some mechanics that inherently work well with a certain tone, whereas some other ones are like totally fine, right? Like if you were to just roll a d20 and say anything over 10 is a win, anything under 10 is bad. There's no vibes attached to that, right? Not necessarily. A lot of that's going to be setting dependent, and you can kind of just make up a fun story that way. if you're playing a game of Dread where you're trying not to tip over a Jenga tower, and there's just like a natural amount of tension that's building there. I think that is like such a great way of executing what is a stressful game. And so that's probably something you can do, is just like look at your favorite games, see what kind of emotions they evoke, and say, okay, well, like what other things make me feel that way? And do I want people playing my game to feel that way? And maybe there's a fun mechanic you can kind of like harvest from that.
Yeah.
Dread isn't the only game that's been around for, or sorry, Jenga's not the only game that's been around for 100 years that people haven't turned into a tabletop RPG. Pull out a game of Battleships, see what happens.
That'd be fun. That'd be cool.
and just to piggyback on that, yeah, like when you're doing your playtesting, especially, see what mechanics make people feel when it's happening. You want your you want your nat 20 moment in your game somewhere. For example, like D&D is a very complicated system compared to a lot of other ones, but what it boils down to is that a nat 20 moment, and so if you when you're making your mechanic, you're also thinking about what the results of that mechanic will make people feel, then I think you will improve on that. Because Graham's right, roll a 10 or higher to succeed is just, it doesn't mean anything. It means it's a die flip.
I love that you brought up the oh my goodness, I've lost my train of thought. It's completely gone. What was the thing that you mentioned before that, Jordan? I'm so sorry.
Something I brought up, the nat 20 moment? Was it?
No, I think it's gone.
All right. Well, maybe it'll come back. Well, we have one last question from the RT discussion text chat. I'm not going to take any more, audience. I'm sorry. Maybe we can ask Graeme and Jordan questions.
Absolutely.
Off air. But one last one from Clay. Clay asks, how do you balance having design ideas that you come up with for your own games, for home games, for fun, versus things that will be, in quotes, for work? Particularly home game stuff that you then start to push into kind of the work category. How does that balance work out for the two of you?
That's an interesting question. I'm going to try to interpret it. Is that like what do we consider a mechanic that we like is going to be a hit point press mechanic versus like what is one we're just going to keep for ourselves? Or
yeah, I would imagine so. Maybe Clay can clarify, and Clay is typing, so we'll see. But let's start with that.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, like, we are very privileged. Our boss is great, and we are encouraged to, share what it is that we make, and there's never a worry that, that there's going to be like any kind of conflict of interest there. It's really only like a good thing. Shift was, like I said, Shift. First time anyone besides Jordan ever saw it was at a work function. And everyone had a really great time.
Yeah, but I guess, do you feel the need to compartmentalize those things, Graeme, or are you just like everything that you might come up with on your own might have a place in a hit point press product at some point?
Sure.
Or do you ever draw a line where you're like, no, this one's for me. Like, this one doesn't need to live out in the world.
Absolutely. There's lots of things that even Jordan hasn't seen that I make. But I mean, I don't think it's like a conscious thing. It's just maybe like it's not where like at a point where I want to show it off yet for whatever reason. Maybe maybe I'm worried that he'll figure something out for me before I have a chance to do it, contrary to my popular or my previous statement. No, it's nothing like that. Some things are for me, It's like sometimes you make a meal for yourself, sometimes you make a meal for your friends.
Yeah, so I think my answer was going to be a little bit more like what Clay is mentioning in the second chunk, is the compartmentalization of work and hobby. And I have been doing this a little longer than Graeme, and I definitely have not struggled with it, but definitely, when I'm coming up with, like, I've got my homebrew campaign settings and ideas for worlds and all this kind of stuff, and Graeme and I are at the advantageous and very privileged place where we are working for someone who encourages ideas being brought to the table, but isn't Disney sort of claiming ownership over our thoughts, as soon as we put them down on paper, right? We're privileged to be able to have that. And it would be very unlikely for me to come up with something that I wanted to publish myself that I wouldn't go through Hit Point Press to at least get the ball rolling, But definitely when it comes to like the difference between hobby gaming and work gaming, the biggest thing for me is playing things in my personal time that aren't work. So right now it's just trying to play as little D&D as I can.
So with that, thank you for being here to chat and discuss. The discussion has been wonderful. And before we say our goodbyes, I wanted to give you both the opportunity to kind of say goodbye and remind folks where they can find you, find your content, and all that good stuff. So Graeme, I'll go to you first.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. So yeah, as we've mentioned many times, we work for Hit Point Press, and we make lots of goodies. We're always looking to make new things. You can find us at Hit Point Press on Twitter. The game that we're working that we spoke a lot about is Shift. So you can find us at Shift RPG on Twitter. And yeah, for me personally, I'm at Risky Pixels, spelled just like how you'll see it here in the server. And that's me. So you can find Jordan at Meta Cartoons on Twitter if you're looking to find out more of his wisdom. And yeah, like feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We'd love to answer you. There's lots of things that we didn't get into that maybe don't suit this format, like project management on RPGs. If you have questions on publishing or like timelines and like how to do any of that stuff,
Yeah, absolutely.
We're happy people that talk about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you, Graeme and Jordan. Definitely, I imagine that Graeme and Jordan will stick around in the Discord server for a little while. So you're welcome to,
Absolutely.
use the server here to reach out to them, the RT discussion text chat, or even some of the more business related tied pools on the server. So thanks again, Jordan, Graeme. I 100% recommend that you go check out Graeme and Jordan's work on Shift RPG. It is a wonderful system, and go give them a follow. They have their own Discord server that you can join up and kind of talk and engage with the community who's learning to play the game and playing the game. And it's definitely worth going to take a look at. It's free. So it's definitely worth it. It's free for you to go and open up. While you go follow Graeme and Jordan and the Shift RPG on all their socials, I'd also like to encourage you to come follow the Tabletop RPG Rising Tide on our socials. That's at TTRPG Rising Tide on Twitter and Mastodon. We'd also appreciate it if you spreaded the word of our wonderful, amazing Discord community and the cool talks that we have, like this one. Speaking of cool talks, our next talk is actually tomorrow night at 7:00. We have Atropos, I believe his name is, from Foundry Virtual Tabletop. So with that, I'm Matt at roll_play_chat on all socials. And thank you for being part of this Rising Tide talk. Remember that a rising tide lifts all boats, including yours.